Hello and welcome to my video on 10 tips to make your Python code more readable. As a developer, it's important not to only write efficient code, but also code that is easy for others to understand and maintain. In this video, I'll be sharing some tips and best practices to help you write Python code that is more readable and maintainable. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you didn't do it already, and leave your comments in the comment section below. There is many more videos on my channel related to Python. So let's start with the tips. The first tip is to use descriptive variable names. It's important to choose variable names that clearly and accurately describe their purpose. Avoid using abbreviation or single letters as variable names, unless they are commonly accepted as the standard practice, such as I for a loop index. So here is the example of the bad way how to do that and the good way. So try to use more descriptive variable names. It would really help others and also you to understand your code later. So the next tip is use white spaces to improve readability. Proper use of white spaces can help to visually organize your code and make it easier to read. This includes using indentation to denote block structure and adding blank lines to separate logical section of code. Here is the example for both bad and good way, and you can see yourself that there is a big difference between the bad and good way, and good way of course is more readable and clear. So the third tip is use comments to explain your code. Comments are used to add explanation and context to your code, helping others to understand your thoughts, process, and the purpose of specific line or blocks of code. So if you're writing the some blocks of code that could not be clear for others to understand this line, better to leave a comment, and it would even save you time in the future as well. Next tip is use descriptive function names. Like with variables, it's important to choose function names that accurately describe their purpose. This will make it easier for others to understand the role of each function in your code. So again, the same as with the variables, here an example, just to make sure that your function named properly and the name is describing what this function doing. The good way is to use some verb in the function name. Next tip is use docstrings to document your functions. Those docstrings are used to provide detailed explanation of the purpose and usage of a function. They should be included at the beginning of every function and should include a brief summary of the function as well as any arguments, return values, and any other relevant information. So next tip, it's number 6, it's use explicit variable types. When possible, it's helpful to explicitly specify the type of a variable, either using Python built-in type hints or by using a library like MyPy. This helps to ensure that the correct types are being used and can make it easier for others to understand the expected behavior of your code. Number 7 is break up long lines of code. It's generally a good practice to keep lines of code to a reasonable length, as long lines can be difficult to read and can make your code more difficult to understand. If you have a long line of code that is difficult to read, try breaking it up into multiple lines using white spaces and indentation to visually organize the code. Next tip is use consistent naming conventions. It's important to use a consistent naming convention throughout your code, as this can make it easier for others to understand and read your code. Some common naming conventions for Python include using snake case for variables and functions and using camel case for class names. Here is the examples for both. Next tip is avoid using global variables. So global variables are variables that are defined outside of a function and are accessible from anywhere in the code. While they can be convenient, they can also make your code more difficult to understand and maintain, as it may not be clear where the value of the global variable is being modified. Instead, try to use local variable within functions or pass variables as an arguments between functions. So there is some cases where you will need to use a global variables, but if it's not necessary, it's better to use function variables. The last tip for today is use well-structured code. Finally, it's important to structure your code in a logical and well-organized manner. This includes using appropriate indentation and blank lines to visualize separate different sections of a code, as well as organizing your code into functions and modules as appropriate. By following these tips, you can help to make your Python code more readable and maintainable, making it easier for others to understand and work with your code. Thank you for watching. I hope that these tips were helpful and that you can use them to improve the readability of your own Python code. If you have some more tips to share, leave them in the comment for others to see. And remember, knowledge is our superpower. Bye-bye.